Okay, so hello everybody. Episode 3 of this triple bill for By Visibility Month, weekday. We get all three, apparently. Lucky us. Um, and this time around, my guest is Vaneet Mehta, who, amongst other things, created the Buy Men Exist hashtag, which anyone on Twitter following these circles will have seen. And now you get to know who to blame for it. And why we talk about it all the time. Um, we've got a lot to talk about. So yeah, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself first off then, Vaneet?
Sure. So hi everyone. My name is Vaneet Mehta. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an Indian bisexual man who's born and raised in Southall in West London. My day job is working as a software engineer, currently moving jobs. That's exciting and also scary. But on the side of that, I work a lot within the LGBTQ plus community. So I do a little bit of volunteering. So I volunteered for Rainbow Films to produce a documentary on queer people of color. And I'm currently volunteering for Middlesex Pride. And our first Pride will actually be in a couple of weeks. Actually, at the time of when this will actually go out, it'll probably be that weekend right afterwards. So that's exciting.
Excellent.
Um, I also co-created a YouTube channel called The Ambassadors, where we discuss bisexual issues. And I'm an avid writer. So my writing has been featured on Stonewall's website, on Metro UK, and in an anthology called The Bible New Testimonials. I deliver talks and I appear on panels on topics like bisexuality and intersectionality, and currently writing a book on bisexual men and co-editing a book on bisexual voices. And as you mentioned, I created the Bisexual Men Exist hashtag.
Yeah, I feel like I've condensed everything you do into a hashtag, but there's so much more to it than that. It's
I
yeah,
am way too busy, and especially during this month,
yeah,
I like by month gives me a few things, but by month is where it's at. I get
yeah.
a lot of gigs.
Good for you. Well, no, there's so much we could talk about, and I think you are probably one of the best placed people, I suppose, to end this little triple bill with, because you know, I mean, intersectionality for one is a subject I think a lot of people will, have heard the word,
Mm.
maybe have an understanding of what it means, but it's something that I think people may be either uncomfortable to talk about or really just not understand what I suppose it does mean in reality. So I think that's something really interesting that we can get to. But I think to start with, the background of everything you're doing is going to be really interesting to talk about. Um, and how that all kind of started. What triggered you to, you know, I assume initially just put a hashtag at the end of a tweet that then took off because
I mean,
it resonated with so many people.
this is the thing is like it actually started way before that. So my hashtag wasn't even one of the first things I did. My hashtag was in actually started in 2019, not 2020, which is
All
what a
right.
lot of people think. But before that, it was just me seeing like writing as a way that I wanted to get back into it. It's something I always enjoyed when I was younger and really wanted to do more of it. But it was that imposter syndrome and that writer's block and that I'm not good enough to do this and my
Yeah.
writing sucks and all of that stuff. And then I got more and more involved in the communities. I started to do more and more things and started to reach out to more people and then started actually volunteering. But the hashtag just started in 2019 because I saw some biphobic comments to a bi mutual of mine on Twitter. And I was like, I'm very tired. And I actually just want to interact with more bisexual men because I
Mm.
don't know enough. And so I made that hashtag and it was really fulfilling and rewarding. And it didn't get the kind of traction it did the second time round. But it was just, yeah, me wanting to do that and amplify us a little bit, but also just interact with more people. And I only had a following of like maybe 500 odd people at that point, and it kind of doubled at that point. So I got like 1,000, and I got a lot of likes and stuff. And I was like, that's
Yeah.
cool, that's cool. The second time round, I probably had like a following of a couple thousand, and again, it was a similar thing. It was after the Love Is Blind episode, and I don't condone Carlton's reaction, but I also understand somewhat where that reaction came from. I think his reaction was very aggressive. I don't think he should have. I don't know if you've watched it, but it was a very aggressive reaction.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, I was like, it wasn't even really about him and what happened to him. It was the debate that sparked on the back of that.
Uh-huh.
As we know with like TV shows and especially Netflix shows and shows like that, a lot of the discussion is online. A lot of the discussion is the hashtag and people using it and talking about the episodes and the drama, and that's what those shows kind of try to do, right? It's to create that online discussion that makes more and more people watch it.
Mhm.
And the discussion around it was biphobia, plain and simple. It was right, but do bisexual men, are they really a thing? Like, and just like
Yeah.
all of that came back out, and I was just like on the train home, and I was like, let's just do something positive. Took a little selfie of myself, posted it, did the hashtag, and was like, let's bring this back. Um,
Yeah.
but got home, went to sleep, woke up the next day, it trended at number one in the UK, trended at number three in the US, did
Wow.
this and that, and I was just like,
I
I
mean,
can't read my notifications.
yeah, it was obviously, timing was a big part because it was such a
Mm.
topic of conversation at that point. But it clearly resonated. I've seen it several times myself before speaking with you, and I think biphobia, bi-erasure, whatever we want to call it, is weirdly acceptable compared
Mm.
to homophobia, transphobia. It's not quite seen as perhaps malicious or damaging for some reason, and I think, well, that's because it's erasure, isn't it? If something is acceptable to degrade, then you're almost trying to get rid of it. And
Yeah,
it's
I think it's that idea of like, because people don't think bisexual is real, then they
yeah,
can't validate any form of discrimination against it. Or they
exactly.
think that your discrimination is just the same as homophobia. They don't seem to understand that it's something completely separate.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's so many misconceptions around that as well. I mean, it's something I was speaking to Sam about in the previous episode was this, very top level generalization, but that there is a sort of trope where by women are fetishized and over sexualized and by men are gay.
Yeah,
And that's the trope we've got to deal with, and
yeah.
neither are correct. But
No,
I
it's
think,
I've actually read a lot of really interesting stuff about this, and the whole concept is called phallocentrism. And
mhm,
it's this idea that when you are penetrated by a man, that is what alters your state and your being. And so when you're a bisexual man having sex with a woman, that doesn't change you, but when you have sex with a man, that then alters
suddenly
the
it
way
does.
you are. And it's that also that patriarchal kind of misogynistic view within that is very
Mhm.
cis heteronormative as well. But it's the idea that sexuality and sex that you have with a man is somehow seen as more important than anything you have with a woman.
Yeah,
It's very bizarre as an idea,
it
but
is very
it's
bizarre,
really what we
and
hold on to.
yeah, and I suppose one of the things we spoke about when we caught up before recording was that you can root a lot of these problems back to, whether you want to call it toxic masculinity or misogyny generally, is often the root cause of things that are actually also aimed at men.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, trend, I suppose, in that sense. Um, I mean, the other thing that happens in that regard, and we've almost certainly both experienced this, is the idea of, if you are in a relationship of one or the other, that the other, not half, because that's not how it works, but the other part of your identity is somehow, diminished by that. And it's probably fair at this point to say we are two by men in same-sex relationships, from my
Yeah.
understanding. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you experience that, people almost negating your bi identity because of the relationship you're in?
I mean, I had it before I was even in a relationship. Like you said, like bi men are just immediately raised as gay. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people just go, oh yeah, it's a gay couple. And I'm like, I understand, but also incorrect.
Yeah.
And I have to keep saying this to people that we need to move away from this idea of heterosexual and homosexual couples because you're raising the people within that.
Yeah.
Like, you're not accepting the fact that these people may not even be men or women, let alone
Well, that's true.
be
Yeah.
like straight or gay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I definitely have experienced that. I've definitely seen people say that and often have to discourage them from using these kind of terms.
Mhm.
Um, because yeah, I've spoken to people about it as well for my book, and people are saying, yeah, come out as bi, but people don't really seem to acknowledge it until I somehow get into a relationship that it's not what they expect, and they go, oh, so you're not. It's like, no, you knew this. I literally told you this,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
just didn't seem to recognize it. And
yeah,
you get that betrayal sense as well, where it's like if they get into a relationship with a woman, then they are betraying the queer agenda, and it's like, well, you knew this. I just don't understand how to
yeah.
explain it to you again and again.
Yeah, it's this whole other level of kind of emotional labor, isn't it? Because there's choosing to come out to somebody, and then there's having to explain what that means.
Yeah, and then it's the
Whereas,
we coming out every single time something changes, not for you, but for them, and how they view
yeah,
you and perceive you, that they need to explain it again. It's like, remember that conversation? You're still that. Remember that.
yeah,
And it gets a little bit exhausting until you just realize that sometimes you just don't want to deal with these people anymore.
yes, yes. Should we just finish there? That's a good point to stop. No, it's a huge topic, and I think it's one we could talk around for a long time because as people on the kind of bi plus spectrum, we've all experienced these types of erasure and
Mm.
assumptions and misconceptions. But something I was really keen to get your opinion on, and we can only speak from our own experiences, although you've done more research than most. Is this idea of intersectionality? So you're introduced yourself as an Indian bisexual man, so you are a man of color. You've got experiences in you know dealing perhaps with different elements to what some of the other
Mm.
people I've spoken to have within your own community and within the LGBTQ plus community and just within society more widely, and how that might affect some of these processes we're talking about, the emotional labor that they're having to come out from time and time again. um, yeah, so I mean, this is a huge question, but how has that affected you, do you feel, over the years? What's your experience of that?
I think the thing that people seem to struggle with a lot is the fact that when you are part of a marginalized identity, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't still have privileges,
Yeah.
because each of us are a multifaceted person who consists of varying identities, right? So whilst I am bisexual and Indian, I'm still a man, I still have male privilege, I still have everything that comes with that. Even if it is somewhat diluted by the fact that I
Yeah.
am bisexual, I still have male identity and
Mhm.
therefore will never understand the female experience.
Yeah.
And so what people don't seem to understand is that even when you are a queer person, you can still have what is white privilege, right? You can still hold that if you are a white person,
Yeah.
and therefore are still somewhat safer than someone like us might be.
Mhm.
Um, so what people, and then what the other thing that people don't seem to understand is the idea of how queerness is perceived when you are a person of color and the issues that you have to deal with by being a person of color. So, for example, with my own identity, I obviously had to grapple with being queer in not only a South Asian and Indian family, but in a very South Asian area. I grew up in Southall, and I always say that to people a lot because that is important for
Mhm.
my story and what I experienced.
Yeah.
Because in that area, there wasn't just an idea and an expectation of what it meant to be a man, but it was so overbearing to the point where I felt like if I just even slightly straying out of this meant that I was thrown to the wayside, that I just couldn't exist within my culture
Mhm.
in a way that was safe for me to do so without someone pointing out to the fact that I don't fit in.
Mhm.
Um, and there's so much to be said about that. And there, and then when I went into queer communities, so often they are not only white dominated but white owned as well, which plays a big part of it. And I'm not only grappling with some of the biphobia that we see in LGBTQ plus spaces, but also the racism, the microaggressions, the fetishization,
Yep.
the sense that you don't belong yet again.
Mhm.
And I think that that is a really important part. That sense of not belonging often means that you can't form the networks and connections and support that you need. You can't access the resources in the same way because you just don't feel safe in the spaces. So, meanwhile, while people of color may experience racism, they could go into people of color spaces, they could live in that kind of area, and whilst they wouldn't be completely safe, they would have that sense of belonging and that sense of comfort and that sense of camaraderie and people who can help them deal with whatever they're dealing with because they will come from a mutual
Yeah.
area of understanding. But that's lost. And then the same thing is happening in the LGBTQ plus community. It can also be lost.
Mhm.
And that's why we tend to struggle more with mental health and sexual health and all of the aspects because we may try and go access a sexual health clinic and we may experience racism, right? It's something that can happen that is not necessarily thought through and not necessarily something that a white queer person has to deal with or a person of color who isn't queer has to deal
Mhm.
with.
Yeah.
That's a lot of spiel and there's a lot more I can
No,
say, but that's
I,
just kind of the high level.
yeah, no, I think you put it really well, and it's something that I can never put myself in those shoes.
Mm,
And I said this to Sam in the last episode. I'm very often read as an average straight white guy, so I get almost that full privilege and almost see behind the scenes, as it were, of how people talk when they don't think we are present, as it were.
mm,
But there's a whole other level added to that. If you are a person of color, or if you're a person with a disability, or with a neurodiversity, because that's what intersectionality is all about, isn't it? These things don't exist mutually exclusive to each other.
yeah,
So you can be finding support from one part of your community at one side, the other part from the other, but actually finding somewhere where both parts or several parts of your identity are represented and supported is a challenge. Yeah,
yeah.
I don't have to
Like
face. So
like the thing that I found weird to me, so I always grew up with other Indian people, with other South
mhm,
Asian people. And it was never an issue for me to say white people in a way where I was like, oh my God, look at what they're doing, look at how they're acting. Because it was just the thing that we did all the time.
yeah,
And suddenly when I would say that in queer spaces, I'd be like, that's a bit, and I'm like, it's not actually offensive though, when you think about it.
yeah,
I can't be racist towards you because I'm literally talking about the way that you act with people of color and how you don't understand it. I couldn't talk about cultural appropriation anymore, like at all. Anytime I did, someone would call me out for being too overly sensitive in a way where when I would say it to my Indian friend who I've been friends with for nearly a decade, we would talk about it and be like, oh my God, yeah, those white people, they're doing it again. They can't
yeah.
help themselves. And suddenly I couldn't say that anymore. Um, and it's really interesting the way that I felt like I had to quiet myself in a
Mhm.
way which I wasn't comfortable with. And so I just removed myself from some of these spaces or just didn't interact with them in the same way.
Mhm.
Um,
It's really interesting actually, because you expect you know queer spaces, LGBTQ plus spaces to be, without getting political about things, progressive,
mm,
or not to be conservative with a small c. You expect an element of openness and understanding there, but actually it is just a microcosm of wider society if you really think
yeah,
about it. So the same kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Issues, the same problems, the same challenges that exist in wider society also exist within the LGBTQ plus community, just at a
yeah,
smaller level. So things like racism, things like people being overly defensive when you criticize them, that's Twitter in a nutshell.
yeah,
They still exist, and you still have to face them in a community you're actually going to for support.
yeah. And so it means that you then have increased barriers. You can't do the same thing. You can't act in the same way. And it's also just like not being regarded in that space. Like so often people might go, "Oh, what is this person doing in that space?" Because they won't read us as queer, and because there's like a certain level of sort of queer coding that doesn't necessarily fit with our other identities. I've spoken to people about this before, like people who are queer hijabis, for example, they can't come into that space because they'll go, oh, it's a person wearing a hijab. They're obviously not queer because it's not read as a queer element. And
Yeah.
so often, so what is read as queer is a white lens. It's so often seen through a white lens, and it's a white idea of what is queer and what queer looks like.
Mhm.
Um, so there's so many different challenges that we have to face, and it's not just dealing with the challenges that people of color have to face or queer people have to face, but it's new challenges that are created because you're part of both,
Yeah,
and things that you have to deal with, which neither group will have to.
yeah. It's it's a fascinating subject, and there's probably a hell of a lot more to it, than we can get into today. And it's something I'd actually like to speak to more people about, because
Mm.
it's such a different experience to that which I have. You know,
Yeah.
and I can't speak about it with any credibility, I suppose, which is why hearing that firsthand from people like you, Vinny, is hugely important. And I think something that more people need to be aware of in the community and outside of it. To be
Yeah.
honest,
I think that's the important thing, is having that level of awareness. I
yeah,
think so often people shy away from the idea that they even have privileges. And I think it's really important to engage with your privilege and understand
yes,
how it impacts your life, and
yeah,
therefore try and do something on the back of that.
mhm,
So often people get upset or hurt about the fact that they have a privilege. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's not actually helpful. It's more helpful for you to just be aware of it instead
yeah,
of being upset or apologetic about it.
yeah.
Your apologies don't help, like
No,
action does, right?
yeah, no, I totally agree. And there's almost an element of chip on your shoulder about being underrepresented or being in a minority community that some
Mm.
people within kind of, let's say, the white spaces
Yeah.
in particular can have. And we see this all the time, whether we're talking about biphobia, homophobia, transphobia, racism, um, where someone is accused of saying something that has been perceived as, let's say, biphobic in this case, and they read that as you calling them biphobic or calling them
Mm.
racist. When actually, no, it's just that one sentence you said. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that. Where did that come from?
Like,
How can we
let's
address that?
open up. Let's learn and address it and talk about it and
Yeah,
realize the place it's coming from and go further.
exactly,
But
absolutely.
yeah,
And there's an assumption or an association that privilege is somehow negative.
mm.
It's that you've earned something because you are privileged, not because you did a good job. No, that's not
Yeah,
really what it means. But I think it's on those of us with privilege of all kinds to
yeah,
accept that and hopefully do something about it. And I hope having these conversations is in their own small way
yeah.
doing
It's like
that.
so often people will be like, "Oh, well, I've had it hard. Where did my privilege get me?" And it's like, right, but we're not saying that your privilege means that you're going to have a perfect life. It means that you didn't have to deal with X, Y, Z. It's like
Yeah,
it's like the inverse. If some people have to deal with racism, you have the privilege of not having to deal with that. If
yes,
some people have to deal with homophobia or biphobia or transphobia, you have the privilege of not having to deal with it.
mm,
And it's trying to understand that it's that inverse relationship where, I am a man, I don't have to deal with misogyny. And so that is the inverse relationship, that it's comprehending that and really trying to work towards breaking that barrier and giving those people those opportunities. It's like, okay, some people are like, oh, but I worked hard and I did all of this. It's like, right, but there's black people and brown people who have to work 10 times harder to get even half of what you've had.
yeah.
And it's about acknowledging that and then trying to do something to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost become a cliche now. There's been so many studies on it that talk about people applying for jobs with two identical CVs, one with an Asian sounding name, or an African sounding name, and one with a white European sounding name, and the same person, it's the white European sounding name that gets called back.
Mm.
It's been replicated in so many different scenarios. I think Harvard were the first kind of big study into that. But as someone who's recently been on the job hunt, you're starting a new role soon. How has that affected your, to take this back to kind of the workplace? How has that affected you feel your job hunting? I mean, one of the very first episodes I published earlier in the year, we talked about vetting potential employers and how do you qualify whether somewhere is going to be a safe space for you. Is that something you've thought about in your recent search?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So in my current role, diversity and inclusion never factors in at work. And while some people say, well, what's the problem? There's no outright XYZ happening in the workplace. And I could say, yeah, I mean, that's true. I have had a couple of instances, like when I did a talk on bisexuality, someone asked me why I wasn't straight pride and thought that was banter. Um,
yeah,
and that's an issue in and of itself, because we need to have training of what is and isn't banter and what isn't acceptable. But I digress. I could say, comfortably, I've never experienced big issues, but that's not necessarily the point. There are certain coded language sometimes where, I might be very honest or blunt and suddenly I'm painted a certain way. There may be glass ceilings, like you look at the senior management, it's all white. You look at the level below that, it's all white, it's all male, it's all cis, it's all straight. You look at that and see that there is a problem, where in terms of the opportunities people are given, etc., etc. Um, and so when I was looking at new places, there's only so much you can see. There are a lot of people who love to stick stickers on themselves without really ever doing the work.
Mhm.
And I think that that is a problem in and of itself, where people are sort of outwardly D&I inclusive, but inwardly not so much.
Yes.
We see that with places like Starbucks, for example, where they did the whole campaign with mermaids, which was incredible and wonderful, and
Yeah.
then also triggered a whole bunch of people who worked in Starbucks going, hey, I actually got misgendered in this and that whilst in the workplace, and they wouldn't let me change my name and they wouldn't accept my pronouns,
Mhm.
etc. And there was like small things that I would look out for, but also I would ask every single interviewer the same question around diversity and inclusion, what it meant to them, especially when there were people of color. I was like, how
Mhm.
with it? What have you experienced? How have you found it?
Yep.
And there were a few places where it just wasn't acceptable. The response just wasn't acceptable. They hadn't really done a lot. There were some people who were like, oh, that's a good question, something I hadn't thought of. And I was like, red flag.
Yeah.
Because there were people where I would interview for them, and even if they were the tick box of privilege, where they were a white cis straight man, um, even they could say something. It's like, I'm aware of this and this and this and what we've
Yeah.
done and what
Yeah.
we've done in the office. And it's like, right, because you should be, right?
Yeah.
You should be the people who should be being taught, so you should be aware of something.
Mhm.
Um, but even just looking on their website sometimes, even though sometimes it can be that sticker of them trying to look appealing, looking on their websites and seeing what they are putting out there were some companies who are they advertised a Pride talk on their Twitter specifically after Pride Month, like on purpose to go, well, Pride is 365 days of the year. I was like, I like that.
Mhm.
There were people who I spoke to. I was like, yeah, I actually engage a lot with this network in our workplace, and we have this, and they have accreditation from outside of their internal stuff. They have accreditation from outsiders who
Mhm.
review their practices. And I'm like, good,
Yep.
that's something.
Yep.
Um, there are places which yeah, I mean, just finding out what they're doing and also reading Glassdoor reviews. There was one company, actually the person that I'm going to work for, who on the Glassdoor review, someone put a negative review and said, went crazy with diversity and inclusion as a negative review. And I was
Well,
like,
I'd say that's a good sign.
that sounds like the white tears coming out. I'm just gonna apply like 100% for that.
Yeah.
But I think that's always really eye-opening as well, to really see the sort of anonymous reviews on former
Yeah.
employees and see what they say.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely. And I mean, speaking about this from a recruitment perspective, I think you're absolutely right. There are a number of organizations who, there's the tick box thing, but there's also the PR thing. That there's an element of um, sort of to be seen to be doing the right thing.
mm,
When internally, actually, it's the marketing and communications team that are owning that. It's nothing to do with internal HR structures or processes or recruitment processes. So you're right to ask these questions, and that's a really good tip, actually, just outright asking that. When you're
yeah,
being interviewed, because you'll get a lot from the response. But there'll be different companies will be at different parts of that journey as well,
mm,
because however we might want it to be different, we're still fairly early into lots of businesses figuring this out. Um, and company size will play into it as well. If there's 30 people, there'll be less in terms of
yeah,
programs and groups, but it's that openness and the inclusiveness as well. I think,
yeah. I find
yeah.
the tech industry in and of itself can be particularly bad at this. You have like the big champions at the top who
Mhm.
talk about how much they care, like Google and Apple and etc. 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 But you have it's upsetting actually, because when you think about the fact that the term software engineer was coined by a woman who worked in that area and tried to push forward the fact that
Mm.
working in software is just as important as an engineering subject and hardware,
Yep.
and the importance that it plays. And now you look at diversity in tech, and it's 80% cis white men, basically.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that statistic, but it's a lot. It's a
You
lot,
won't be far wrong.
but,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be far off. And it's disappointing to see, um, and that creates such an atmosphere that people don't seem to understand it does.
Mhm.
You have that atmosphere, and suddenly you're going to have women who won't want to speak up because they're going to see in a certain way, and people of color who don't want to speak up because they'll be seen a certain way, and they just don't want to be seen. Like, I can say this from my own perspective, you don't want to be seen as the difficult person,
Yep.
and I have been painted like that in my workplace. I've been painted as the difficult person. And I know the barriers that that's going to create and the barriers that I'm already facing.
Mhm.
Um, and you just don't want to create extra challenges for yourself. Like, you know how people are going to see you. You know that they're immediately going to go, well, he obviously like this, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And you just don't want to add to it.
Yep.
Um, it's happened in workplaces where your voices just aren't heard. One of the clients that I worked with, they had quite a discriminatory advertisement, and when Watchdog dismissed it, they were like, well, everyone in the workplace was like, well, of course it was nonsense, and basically on the verge of saying special snowflakes.
Mhm.
And when a black woman was speaking out, immediately it was that seeing her as the aggressor,
Yep.
because that's how they tend to be seen. And after all of the conversation, an East Asian person spoke out, because it was particularly discriminatory to East Asian people. And the East Asian person spoke out and was like, actually, I found this really offensive, but I didn't feel like I could say anything.
Yep.
And that's the problem, is like, when you create that atmosphere, you're immediately worried about what would happen if you were to come out in this space, or if you were to speak out in this space.
Mhm.
And you get that banter culture. So often is toxic masculinity and misogyny in sort of low undercurrents within it.
Yep.
And they don't seem to understand that having the diversity means that the culture changes. And then it's about creating the inclusion as well, and making sure that those people feel safe to speak out and talk up and put their point across.
Yep.
And yeah, and I just don't
Yep.
think people seem to get that. And the tech industry is so bad for this.
It is, and I think you've got the startup culture within tech at the moment, where every other day there's a new exciting business. Everyone's trying to be a unicorn, and so much of that is driven by, well, frankly, who's got the cash
Yeah.
to start a business, and that's mostly white men from certain economic backgrounds, let's say, and that's why there are so many such a lack of businesses started by people of color, by women, by anyone who isn't a straight white man, I suppose.
And you get
And
bad tech. This is the worst part, is you get bad tech.
mm,
I have had experiences where it's like, oh, one of those like fun booths where you stand in front of it and then you can dress yourself up. And the camera would not recognize my face.
wow.
It would recognize the face of my white friend standing about 6 feet behind me,
Mhm.
like the side of their face, but it would not recognize mine, who was standing on the exact spot it told me to, and the
Yeah.
exact spot where I would pick up my friend. And that's the problem, is that when you don't have those people,
Yeah,
you
you don't test
actually
for
get
these
bad
things.
tech. Like,
Yeah, I'm sure there was there not a fairly big story? I feel like it was Heathrow. I don't want to name them wrong, because if they haven't done anything wrong, that's bad. But I'm sure one of the big airports, the sister cameras they used to scan people's faces as they were going to check in for a flight had the same problem. And
not
when
surprised.
you're going for a flight, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, we're going back a few years now, so I forget which airport it was, but it was in the UK anyway, and
Mm,
it was the same issue. And that's it. Diversity makes everything better, because it
mm,
gives you diverse viewpoints, cultural kind of backgrounds, and helps you. It fills the gaps. It helps you see things that you wouldn't see,
yeah.
with privilege, I suppose.
So if you had
You know,
people of color working on this camera tech, it would have been like, hey,
that
maybe
happens.
putting in loads of white faces as your training data is not a good thing,
Yeah,
and the problems that it causes.
exactly.
Um,
It seems like such a simple issue, but that's exactly why that happened. You're
yeah.
right, and it's why I would always kind of lead with inclusivity as being the more important of the two.
Mm,
Diversity is brilliant, but actually diversity without inclusion is nothing, because then
yeah.
you've just got a diverse set of really unhappy people.
Who feel like they can't talk and feel stifled in the space. And
Exactly.
that's exactly it. Is even in my workplace where I'm working currently, I was encouraging, never happened, but encouraging them to like start doing pronouns.
Mm.
Because even though I don't, as far as I'm aware, we don't have trans people in the workplace, making that inclusive environment is important in case we did hire someone.
Yeah.
And I think you should have inclusion even without diversity,
Yes.
because you need to make an atmosphere where if someone was to come in from a diverse background, they feel safe from the offset, not
Yeah.
feel like they have to be that spokesperson that changes everything.
Yes.
So that is the
Absolutely.
worst part about being a diverse person, is you feel like you have to change everything
Yeah.
for you to feel safe.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think even for smaller organizations, that's really important. If you
Mm,
can be inclusive and open to learning and being corrected, then that's hugely important, because a small
mm,
organization doesn't have statistically the likelihood of having such a diverse workforce as
yeah,
a company with thousands of employees does, who almost by default will have a more diverse workforce. But
mm,
if you can, yeah, be outwardly showing inclusivity, whether that is just as simple as putting pronouns in your email signature,
yeah.
um, you know,
And that was one
it,
of the things that I loved about the place I'm going to work for now, is that they have it in their email signature. And I'm a cis man, it doesn't impact me.
mm,
But at the same time, me seeing that was
yeah,
like, I know this is going to be a good place. I
yeah, it's the story
already,
behind it.
yeah.
Yeah, completely. And it's why I think platforms like LinkedIn, who've embedded that within people's profiles and things like
Mm,
that, it's definitely the right step. Um, But listen, it's been really, really good to talk to you, Vinny, and I think there's so many other areas we
mm.
could go into. And I think, yes, I will definitely be on the lookout for your book as well. Is that due for, when is that, next year? Are you getting
Oof,
ready for it? Have you
yeah,
got
I
a
mean,
deadline yet?
my writing deadline, I asked for an extension, and it's basically my writing deadline is now the end of January, which I'm hoping I will definitely succeed at. And then I don't know how long the process is after that, but
Yeah,
potentially a 2022 launch. If I can get it in for by month, I will, because that's all I want.
yeah, that would
I
be
want
good
to have the
timing.
bias of by months. That'd be great.
Definitely. And a purple cover, obviously.
Yes, definitely.
No, brilliant. Well, yeah, I'll be sure to make sure I share that far and wide as well, because I think it's going to be really interesting to, just, yeah, see what your research has been telling you, and hopefully backing up lots of what we've been talking about. But yeah, if people want to reach you, I'm sure, Twitter seems to be the place.
Yes. So my Twitter is a very professional Nintendo Mad 888. And I'm never going to change it because I don't believe in putting any level of professionalism into my personal life. You're going to know from the offset I'm not a professional person, and that's that. Um,
Yes,
yeah,
this
so
is
reach
where
me
I,
there. I also have Instagram, and also because this is going out on the 23rd, Middlesex Pride is actually, give me a second. Let me just like double check.
double check.
I'm pretty sure
See,
it's the 26th. I just want to.
now you're making me commit to editing this in time for the 23rd.
I am. I am.
I've been promising this triple bill. I've got 3 episodes to edit now.
So Middlesex Pride is on the 26th of September. So it'll be right after this goes live. So everyone
Amazing.
who's listening, please tune into Middlesex Pride on the 26th.
Yes.
I'm not actually, I think part of what I did is in it, but I was part of like the volunteering and community
Yeah.
engagement. So I got together a really great panel on sexual health, which is very important. So yes, tune in for that. It's going to
Yeah.
be a great discussion, and there's a
Definitely.
lot of great stuff going on: DJing, dancing, poetry. It's the
Nice.
works.
And for those of you listening who aren't in the UK, Middlesex is not a euphemism for bi. Um, it is a fairly old-fashioned name for a part of West and South London that
Yes,
used to be a county and is now just
yeah,
colloquially what that area is called. So just
yeah.
in case anyone outside of the UK was confused by
But it's
that.
important because it's an area that doesn't seem to talk a lot about LGBTQ plus, and is a
Yeah,
very very diverse area
it
full of
is.
a lot of
Really is.
Eastern European, South Asian people, particularly Indian and yeah, Indian and Pakistani people, and a lot of Black people as well. So it's
Yeah,
very very important. So
definitely. definitely. No, definitely check that out if you can. But no, let's leave it there. But thank you for your time. It's been fascinating to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.